Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning. It's really a beautiful morning because there's so many great things that are going on in the world, and there's so much light in our beautiful world. Last week, I did not expect the amount of feedback that you gave me from my class on the 10 plagues and the Sefirot. And so it inspired me to take a look at this week's Torah portion from a similar lens. A little different, but you'll see there's going to be similarities. So I'm going to build on last week's class for you. That's my hope, at least today. And um, let's see where it goes. So, where are we in the Torah? Pharaoh, the emperor of Egypt, and his people are struck with 8 plagues, 8 devastating plagues that crush the nation. They crush the economy of Egypt. Those plagues are blood, frogs. I'm sorry, I'm not dipping with my finger. I should be. Lice, devouring beasts, an epidemic, boils, hail, locusts. I got them in order. Look at that. Now, all of these plagues befall Egypt through the hands of Moses and Aaron. They are acting as the messengers to Pharaoh, warning him time and time again that if he does not liberate the Hebrews, if he does not free the nation that he has had hostage, if he does not free them from their barbaric oppression, he and his country would suffer a humiliating defeat. And throughout their contact with each other, for it was around a year, if you go through the timeline of how it happened, it was roughly, depending on the plague, it was somewhere between 3 weeks and a month, before, during, after. And throughout this year of the plagues, the relationship between Moses and Pharaoh appears to be, at least in my mind, surprisingly neat and respectful. And it follows a fairly predictable pattern. Moses enters the palace. He negotiates with Pharaoh for the release of the hostages. The king remains abstinent. Moses warns him of the impending destruction. And then, when the destruction comes, Pharaoh promises Moses that he's going to change his attitude. When the plague is gone, Pharaoh goes back to his old abstinent self, refusing to redeem or free the hostages, to redeem the Jews, and then it happens again. Moses returns to warn him. And this pattern repeats itself time and time again. And Pharaoh, throughout the entire time, doesn't get angry with Moses. And so Moses, I would say, in kind, at least the way the Torah describes it, which is the words of Moses, Moses displays a certain respect towards the king. Their exchanges are conducted. I'm just kind of reading into the feelings of the verses here, but their exchanges are conducted in somewhat of a respectful and dignified manner. And only in this week's Torah portion, after the ninth plague of darkness, in which the Egyptians experience absolute darkness for 6 days, that's when things start to get tense. So I want to open our class today at the plague of darkness, because I think there's something here that we can unpack about this relationship and what we can do. And I know some of you are thinking, oh, well, it's obvious because Moses was found by his daughter and he was probably a fixture in the palace. They had a relationship before. We don't know this from the text. We know this a little bit from the Midrash. We know this from homiletics. We don't know this from the text. And the text, so looking at the Torah itself, it seems like there's a certain kindness. But what I want to focus on is not necessarily that part of the relationship, but the when the relationship in the Torah changes. And this is the opening of the plague, or right after the plague of darkness. So the plague of darkness is finished. And Moses, it's obvious now because Pharaoh consents to liberate the hostages, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews. Um, but he says, I have a condition. This starts a negotiation. Their flock and their cattle need to stay behind in Egypt. Moses is like, no, we're going with everything. The men, the women, the children, the flock, the cattle, you name it, we're taking everything and maybe even more. So Moses completely rejects the offer. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh becomes furious. And he says, and this is I'm going to quote the verse. He says, go from me. Do not see my face anymore. For on the day you see my face, you shall die. A completely different conversation from the niceties that are going back and forth for the past 10 months. What does Moses respond to him? Moses says, truth you have spoken. I shall never see your face again. A few moments later, after warning him about the 10th and the final plague, which is going to be the death of the Egyptian firstborn, Moses leaves, as the Torah says, he leaves Pharaoh's presence in burning anger. The Talmud even comments that Moses slapped Pharaoh in the face before he left. So here's my question. A question that I've thought about for some time. Why did the first 8 plagues, all of them devastating in their consequences, wrecking the entire Egyptian society, why did those plagues not manage to elicit such fury from Pharaoh towards Moses, all of these niceties? And why, like devouring beasts, taking over Egypt, that's not enough to rock Pharaoh from his calmness and have him thunder, Moses, get lost, don't come back again? And if killing Moses was a viable alternative, why wait so long? Why did it take 8 plagues? And why would Moses act his acts of turning the water into blood, or bringing disease, boils, lice to the Egyptians, or an epidemic to kill the Egyptian animals? Why would that not suffice to motivate Pharaoh to kill Moses and get rid of him already? What was it about the plague of darkness that caused Pharaoh, for the first time in what we understand to be their long relationship, to present Moses with a death threat? So I want to go into the answers. I also want to expose a couple of interesting elements to this. One of the answers to this question, in order to understand it, we have to understand the deeper psychological and mystical story of the Egyptian exile. Pharaoh represents the human being who substitutes humanness with power, who substitutes integrity with success. joy with fun, right with might. The name Pharaoh actually spells out the Hebrew word ha'oref, which means the nape. Kabbalah talks about this and explains that that's not by chance, that Pharaoh stands guard at the border between the brain and the heart, disguised in the back of the body to ensure that ideas of the mind should not penetrate the heart. Pharaoh ensures that we don't feel ourselves and the world around us in a genuine and deep way, that we're removed, that your mind is here, the world of ideas and philosophy are here, but don't feel it. Don't experience it. It's an intellectual pursuit. The Greeks love that. Don't study Torah because it's God's word. Study it as philosophy. Separate the mind and the heart. Moses, who grows up in the palace, as we understand, what does he represent? The moral conscience of this person. Moses can barely speak. He displays a still, inner voice of truth that cannot be stifled, even in the presence of tremendous grandeur, of tremendous success. The name Moses, or Moshe in Hebrew, was given to him because he was drawn from the water. Moshe means drawn out from. Water creatures, we're going to go real Kabbalistic here. Water creatures cannot afford to be disconnected from their life source. Water creatures have to stay in water, even for a single moment. Land creatures, detachment from water, detachment from anything, no problem. But water creatures, detachment from water equals death. So from a Kabbalistic perspective, Moses embodies the dimension in each of us that will not remain silent as we detach our lives from our source, from our soul, from our etzem, from the part of God that's within us, from our inner selves, from the divine core of our identity. And so Kabbalah says that most of us have a little Pharaoh that's lurking in our nape. And each of us has a little Moses that's confronting it. The little Pharaoh that's trying to disconnect us, dysregulate us. The little Moses that's trying to put us all back together. Now, a lot of people, some people, possess very ambivalent feelings towards their moral conscience. They hate it, but they respect it. It makes their lives miserable, but they don't want it to die. Somehow, knowing that my conscience is alive, despite the tremendous burden it imposes on my ambitions, on my schedule, it sends me the message that I still have hope, that I'm not completely decayed. And this was true with regards to Pharaoh's relationship with Moses. Pharaoh struggled with Moses. He despised him. He fought him. He scoffed at him. But he never wished Moses would die, because in some deep way, Pharaoh would listen to Moses. He would hear his words. Though when it came to practice, he rejected it and he threw it to the dogs. And that's why this kept on happening over and over and over again. I'll tell you what this reminds me of. It reminds me of an addict who continues to see their therapist, who continues to attend a recovery program, but refuses to surrender to the addiction. The addict may feel tremendous hate towards a therapist who speaks to the addict words that resonate with the dignity of truth. Yet deep down, the addict knows that this therapist is a savior, not a foe. The relationship is the only good thing left in the addict's life. And so there's part of the addict that refuses to give up. But the other part of it is there's a disconnect. How do I take what I know and turn it into what I feel? And this ambivalent attitude endures for a long time. And I'm not talking about just the addict the way we know addicts. I'm talking about an addict to power, to fame, to manipulation, to falsehood, also to drugs and alcohol. An addict experiences many a plague as a result of their destructive patterns. They may observe firsthand the small inner voice of Moses that they should have heeded to, but to no avail. They're stuck in this smug comfort zone, abusing themselves, hurting people around them, and sometimes in very ugly ways. You're like, why is he talking about addicts? I'll tell you why. Because then the plague of darkness befalls. And we feel tragically free to say goodbye to our conscience once and for all. Darkness. Now, last week, we spoke about the 10 plagues, and each one represented a corrupted version of the 10 features that make up human personality. What was darkness? Darkness was conception, chachma. So let me explain a little further. I'm going to touch on this a little more today. The point that I'm making is while the first 7 plagues displayed and symbolized the decay of human emotions, what did the last 2? The last 2 plagues reflected the ruin of the cognitive dimension of the human experience. The 10th and final plague represented the death of the subconscious. Darkness was the death of the conscious. The plague of the firstborn becomes the death of the subconscious. So my emotions may be decayed, they may be wasted, even my intelligence may lay in ruins. But as long as my power of conception, as long as my chachma, my ability to listen to the therapist, my ability to listen to the voice of Moses within me and accept the truth, as long as that is intact, there's hope. A human being may be completely detached emotionally. The heart may appear frozen and dead. But as long as the human can conceive with their mind that there's a reality beyond the present condition. There's always a hope for freedom. There's always a hope to reach liberation. As long as the person still possesses the ability to observe, to discern, to listen, listening is so important, to hear something that they may not know or feel on their own. As long as a person can experience that, they're not going to murder their moral conscience. They may not feel its beauty, but at least they understand in some subtle way that it's deserving of life. What we are frightened of, most of all, is reaching a moment of darkness when not only our hearts, but even our minds turn numb, when we can't see reality anymore. Then we're capable and we can say to the Moses within us, get lost. If I hear you once more, I will kill you forever. When your mind becomes fried, you can take the most precious elements of your life, your precious cigars, and deliberately destroy them because you've lost any conscious touch within your own reality. According to Kabbalah, this is one of the most important objectives of a human being. The heart may be complicated, the heart may even be lost, but we always need to make sure that we don't lose the ability to see another reality, to listen, to see the truth beyond whatever our present feelings are, whatever our present moods are. And so when Moses heard these words from Pharaoh, he knew the battle was over. And so he slapped Pharaoh in the face and he left the palace. What does that mean? The Talmud says that slapping another human being in the face is like slapping God in the face. Because the face of a human being reflects the light of God. But at that fateful moment, Pharaoh lost his last conscious spark of God. And so Moses slapped him in the face, symbolizing, as Kabbalah says, the fact that Pharaoh had nothing left in his face. By wanting to kill Moses, what Pharaoh essentially was killing was his own soul. As in the picture of Dorian Gray, Pharaoh's face was no more human. And so, in our lives, we don't have to go to the extremes. Obviously, in Kabbalah, we go to extremes so we can understand where we all fit in the middle. Darkness. The disconnect between the mind and the heart, and reconnecting it, finding that Moses within us. It's very hard. Some of us spend a lot of time in our hearts. Some of us spend a lot of time in our minds. I can tell you I spend a lot of time in my mind. And it's hard for me it's a process and a challenge for me to be able to bring those ideas and be able to bring them to my heart. And it's a constant struggle. Some people have the opposite struggle. They spend a lot of time in their heart and they have a very hard time, intellectualizing this. They may have to listen to this more than once or twice to be able to understand it fully. Some people get it right away, but they leave the class and they're like, okay, that was nice. That was a nice piece of information, but what does that mean to me? The chachma. We can never lose the vision. We can never lose the conception. We can never lose that hope. The moment we lose that conscious thought, then Pharaoh wins. We have to always allow the little Moses within us to regulate, to find our voice. The process is not easy. Part of the reason why it's not easy is I don't know, I wasn't living then, but I think that in the past, either people didn't have time to think about these things, and we have the luxury of the fact that we can just sit here and overthink, or or they actually had tools that we don't have, or that we have but we're not accessing because our society has trained us in a way that we don't know how to access these tools. Our society has created education, edukara, the conveying of a message. That became what's the symbol of education is. Let's go to an interesting lecture. Wow, that was a very interesting lecture. That was great. But I think as the world changes, and we're going to see this change happening in our lifetime with technology and with artificial intelligence, which I don't know much about, but I'm fascinated by. I think that the quest for knowledge is not going to be as important as it was. When we were younger, we needed to absorb tremendous amounts of knowledge. We would have exams in school to be able to make sure that we absorb the knowledge. That was just collect knowledge. And today, first of all, with the advent of the internet and Google, and now with the advent of AI, once it actually becomes accurate, we're going to be able to, in a minute, have whatever knowledge we need. Obviously, for those of you who are Shabbat observant, you're always going to need the book. But there won't be this need. There isn't this need to just be edukara, just the conveying of a message. And it's going to become, the world is actually asking for us to find the inner Moses. So, my blessing to you and to me and to all of us is that we should be able to listen to that voice of conscience, that voice of moral clarity, even in what may seem to be dark, which I don't think is dark, because darkness is not a creation. It's just the absence of light. So in a place where it looks dark, for a moment, just remember that it's just dark for the moment. And all you need to do is find the inner Moses, look for the light. There's light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel's not very far from its end. Look for it, find it, hold it, and bring it to your heart and make it your own. With that, I wish you a beautiful Shabbat Shalom.